Hey there, it's Liz from No Trace. I have another project to help you get through your pile of selvage edges. It is for these really cute leaf-shaped coasters or mug rugs. These sew up really fast. They're fun. I think they're adorable. Let's go. Okay, in order to make this cute little mug rug, I'm going to be working with a bunch of selvage edges, and I picked out my selvage edges and scraps of fabric that have some green on them, but obviously you can use whatever colors you want. I also have a piece of organic cotton batting that is 6 by 6 inches and a piece of scrap fabric that is 6 by 6 inches. The first step is to cut the cotton batting in half along the diagonal so that we have two triangles to work with. And the easiest way for me to do this is with my quilting ruler. I'm just lining it up from corner to corner here, and then I'm going to cut it with my rotary cutter, but you could also just trace a line and then cut it with your scissors, or even just eyeball it and cut it with your scissors. Then I made a really simple pattern piece for the mug rug that is the same size as one of my triangles from the batting. So the length from tip to tip is the same length that's on my diagonal. And then I just cut it into a curve to create that sort of leaf shape. So this pattern piece is 8.5 inches long from point to point, and it's 3 inches wide at the widest, but you can definitely modify this to however you want. And then I went and I drew some angled lines on the pattern piece on both sides to help me remember how to attach my fabric onto the batting. So the right side of my coaster, the lines go up to the right, and then if you flip it over to the left side, the lines go up to the left. And that'll just help me remember how to attach the selvage edges in the next step. Now I'm going to start sewing my selvage edges onto one of my triangles, and I am going to be lining them up with the straight edge. So if you look at your triangle, you're going to have a 90-degree angle on one corner. Okay, and wherever that 90-degree angle is, that is your bottom edge. So you want to line up your fabric straight and or parallel with the bottom edge. That way, when we cut our curve and trim this down, the edges will be coming up at an angle. Okay, at the machine, I bumped up my stitch length to the longest length, which is 5 millimeters. And I'm just gonna sew this scrap onto the batting with a straight row of stitches. Okay, my first piece is attached. So now I'm gonna get a second selvage edge, and I'm gonna attach it onto the first selvage edge with the right sides together. And I'm gonna join them with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or a 1/4 inch seam allowance rather. All right, once again at the machine, I'm just gonna go straight down, joining these edges together. Then I'm gonna open it up and just press it with my fingers so that the second piece is laying nice and flat. And then I'm gonna sew right on top of that second piece. Okay, 2 pieces are attached. I'm just gonna keep adding strips onto this triangle all the way up to this point until it's totally covered. So I'll be right back. Okay, my first triangle is totally covered. It just took a couple minutes to do that. So I'm gonna flip it over so I can see the cotton batting, and I'm gonna use my pattern piece to trim away the extra selvage edges. And obviously I will save those for a future project, TBD. So I'm just cutting right along my pattern piece, and of course I'll save these. And then you could either trace with the pen, or if you've got your rotary cutter, just trim around with the rotary cutter. So I gotta use my muscles, my sewing muscles. Those are a thing, right? Okay, save this. And of course, I'm gonna save my tiny bits to put in my tiny bits bin, my Tibby for short. And these get transformed into stuffing and future projects. So save your little bits. Okay, my first side is complete. So I'm gonna go through those exact same steps with the second side, but now I'm gonna be sewing the pieces on so that they come off at an angle going this way. So they're gonna be parallel to this bottom edge rather than this bottom edge. So I'm just gonna be sewing them on one at a time, just like I did for this guy. Okay, I have both of my halves finished here. So now I'm gonna just place them right sides together. I'm gonna pin them along the straight edge and then sew them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I put my stitch length back on a shorter length. So now it's at 3.2 millimeters. And I do want to do a little back stitch at the beginning and the end of this row of stitches. Okay, these two are joined. So I want to actually trim this seam allowance down a little bit more because that's going to help my little mug rug lay flat when I'm using it. I'm already picturing my morning coffee sitting on top of my mug rug. So I want it to really function. So I trimmed it down a bit, and then I am going to take the painstaking step of flattening the seam with the iron. Let me show you how to do it. So there's a lot of different fabric here in the middle and a lot of seams coming together. It's a little hard to tell what's the left side and what's the right side. So just be patient and take a moment to find the center and fold it open and then carefully press it with the iron. And I know it's a little bit annoying, but it is worth it in the end. So I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, I did it. I persisted and it's flat. And now I want to flip it over and also press it really well on the front. And now it's time for our other scrap of fabric. I'm going to flip this over so that it's wrong side up. And I'm going to put the wrong side of my leaf pattern right on top of the wrong side of my scrap. And then I'm going to take a pen. You could also do this with chalk, but you want to be precise. So that's why I'm using a pen. And I am going to carefully trace my finished leaf onto my fabric scrap. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. I'm not sure how well you can see my tracing, but I'm just going to cut right on that line. And of course, I will save the scraps for a future project. That's just what I do here at No Trace. So I will go ahead and finish cutting this out. Now, ideally, these will fit together really well with the right sides together. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a few pins around the edges, just so it doesn't wiggle around too much, so that we can sew these together over at the machine. And I want to make sure to leave an opening on one of the straight sides. So I'll probably start my stitches here near this corner and leave this as the opening because it'll be a little bit easier to turn it right side out and press it on a straighter part rather than right on a curve or right on one of the points. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, and when I get to the corner, let me show you. Well, first I'm going to back stitch. And then at the corner, I'm just gonna leave my needle in the down position, lift my presser foot. I have a knee bar, so that's how I'm lifting it. Oh, you know what? I didn't quite get to the middle, so I'm just gonna go one more stitch forward, lift, and pivot, and then just keep sewing down along this side. Now that I've sewn around, I want to just double check my seam before I move on to the next step and make sure that I got both layers all the way around. My seam looks good. So what I'm going to do next is trim down the seam to make it a little bit easier to turn this right side out and have it lay nice and flat the way this one does. So I sewed with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to trim it down, especially here at the tips. I'm going to trim it to about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Except I'm not going to trim this opening that we left because we need to be able to fold that fabric and press it in a future step. But I am going to trim here and all the way around. Now, if I was skilled enough, I would just sew it with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I wouldn't have any fabric to trim. But it's really hard to do that, especially when you're working with, at least for me, I'm speaking for myself, of course. When I'm working with bulky material like this, it's nice to give myself a little more wiggle room in the seams. So I go a little bit bigger and then straighten it out. All right, I've done that first step of trimming it down, and now I'm actually gonna cut little notches. So basically like little triangles out of this fabric, especially along this curve. And this is gonna help it, again, to sit nice and flat. I can already picture it on my table with my morning cup of coffee. Let me know in the comments. Do you have coffee in the morning? Are you a tea drinker? Or nothing in the morning? I admire you, by the way. Also, if you're learning anything or enjoying this, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I always really appreciate that. All right, so I'm gonna keep cutting these little notches out and I'll be right back. Okay, it's fully notched all around. So next I'm going to turn it right side out. Time for the sort of grand reveal. You've already kind of seen it. We've gotten peeks at it. And I'm going to use my handy dandy chopstick here to push out the tips and also to push out the seam all the way around. You could use a pencil, like the eraser end of a pencil, anything that is narrow enough to get in there. Okay, so it should look like this now. And if you find that you don't like how flat it's laying at this stage or after you iron it, you could turn it wrong side out again and cut more notches off of the seam. That'll help it lay flatter, but this should be good. So next I'm going to fold this edge in, fold my opening in about 1/4 of an inch because that was my original seam allowance, and press it with the iron. And I'm gonna go ahead and press this whole edge with the iron. My iron went off. That's okay. Back on again. Okay, I'm gonna come back to that tricky spot and I'm gonna first iron the rest of it. And then I'm gonna take a moment and fuss with this spot. And then press it. And then I am going to top stitch all the way around. I bumped my stitch length back up to 5 millimeters. I always want to say millimeters. I'm going to start my top stitch kind of down near this bottom corner. And I'm just going to take my time and go all the way around. When I get to the corner, I just leave the needle down, lift and pivot. And it might get a little sticky there, so you might have to do a little hand crank. Trim the loose threads and your little mug rug is done and ready for your morning coffee or tea or water. Hey, if you want to show your support for this channel, I'd love for you to check out my membership feature. All you have to do is click the join button below this video to learn more.